Hey everyone, I'm Josh Loftus, and this is the Everyday Monday podcast, the podcast where we talk about everyday people doing everyday things in everyday churches. Whether you're a pastor, a plumber, or that guy that brings the pack of Oreos to the church potluck, we know who you are, we see you. This podcast is for you. This is where we find value in the trenches of Christian life. Welcome to Everyday Monday. And with me in the trenches today, I have a very cool guest. He is the youth director at Avondale Bible Church in Woodinville, Washington. He's a comic book nerd, he's a punk rock nerd, and a sushi lover. Mr. Luke Marselus. Luke, how are you doing today, brother?
I'm doing great.
So sushi's disgusting. And I guess the first question I have is, how can you actually get through the mental mentality of putting sushi in your mouth and actually enjoying it?
No, you just got to recognize it's kind of a weird thing. And if you're into trying weird food, then yeah, you just go for it. It's weird that fish tastes so much better when it's not cooked. It's a strange thing.
Yeah. Okay. So Luke, before we get going here, man, give us a short bio of who you are, married, little known fun fact. Tell us a little bit about yourself, man.
Yeah, my name's Luke. I am married. I've been married for almost 8 years, over
Ooh.
7.5 years. And then what weird thing about me?
Yeah. Give us a little, like a little fun fact, maybe a little known fun fact.
Little known fun fact. I was actually impressed with that bio there. You mentioned some of those things. And I didn't give you any of that stuff. I was like, oh, I wonder what he's going to say. You know, it could be anything. And it was actually accurate. Those three things were true. What was it? It was sushi, it was punk music,
sushi, punk rock, and comic books, man.
Yeah, well, I guess we gotta jump right into the SNYDER CUT movement. That's what this podcast is about. So yeah, I'm an avid supporter of the movement to release Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League.
That's right. That's right.
So that's maybe little known.
I hear it doesn't exist, but then I hear it does exist, but I hear that we'll never get it.
It's one of those things like the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2. It's just going to take 20 years and we'll get it someday. Yeah.
That's right. 20 years and a lot of screaming comic book fans.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So, hey, Luke, tell us what you do. Tell us, I know you're the youth director there at Avondale Bible Church. Give us just kind of a quick synopsis of how did you get into that, whether ministry was something that you were trying to get into or if you just kind of fell into it like a lot of people. Give us the best part of that job and one of the hardest parts.
Yeah, so just real quick, kind of how I got into it. I was part of youth ministry when I was in high school and really enjoyed it. It had a pretty big effect on how I viewed the church, how I viewed scripture, how I viewed the Christian life. I had men that spent time mentoring me, discipling me, and it was really beneficial for me. So going into college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I was a communications major with a minor in Bible. After college, it was the Obama economy, so there weren't jobs.
That's right.
Yeah, so I was working like customer service jobs, got myself an internship with a youth ministry at a church that turned into a part-time job. And then the church I'm at now offered me a full-time position. So about 4 years ago, my wife and I moved up here, and yeah, we've been doing it ever since. We kind of center our youth ministry on the Great Commission, essentially like looking at everything we do kind of through the lens of, is this discipleship or is this evangelism? And for the students that we're ministering to that aren't believers, we're just wanting to communicate the gospel to them as many times as possible, in as many ways as possible. And for the students that are believers, it's the same thing. We're trying to tell them the gospel as many times as possible and as many ways as possible, and really trying to get students to see that something that applies to every aspect of their life.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. Is how do you go about, especially with the struggles that modern day youth are dealing with today, and just kind of the overexposure to social media, whatever it is, the influences that are coming in from around them. How do you really nail down the truth that the gospel is not just a one-time thing, right? It's not just something that is applied to your life. Boom, your eyes are open, you're saved. And then the gospel really doesn't have any effect in your life anymore. How do you go about, as a youth director, showing and teaching that the gospel is literally the center of Christianity, and that needs to be the thing that filters every aspect of life. How do you go about teaching that to youth? Because it's hard enough teaching that to adults.
Sure, yeah, and that's something I don't think I really had an understanding of the fact that salvation wasn't like a past experience that a Christian has, that a Christian can say, I have been saved, I am being saved, I will be saved, that I am justified, I am being sanctified right now, and I will be glorified in the future, and that the entire Christian life, once you become a Christian, is sanctification. It's God through primarily the Holy Spirit conforming you into the image of Christ. And so in youth culture, that's a weird thing, because it's a totally different philosophy, a philosophy that says that you are designed by someone else, that your identity is supposed to be found in something outside of yourself. And that thing is supposed to define you and be your purpose and your meaning in life. And especially you're talking about social media. I think there's good and bad aspects of social media. It can be used well, it can be used poorly. It's a tool.
Yep.
But primarily what it's teaching kids is like you develop your own identity, you center it around whatever you want it to be centered on, and you kind of just find your fulfillment in that. And it really is just it's all about you. So it is a call to students that we have to just entirely reject that life is not about me. Life is about knowing, I would say life is about knowing, loving, and obeying God.
What you basically just described there is just ministry in general. You're not doing anything special in youth ministry that you wouldn't do for adults. It's just applied to life a little differently. You're still teaching the same truth, teaching the same concepts, and taking the same pathway as, look, the gospel is central to everything.
Right. Yeah. It's the same gospel. It's the same scripture. It's different barriers, I think, sometimes. And that just comes from, youth have their own kind of unique reasons that they're rejecting the gospel. Ultimately, it's the same. We're all suppressing the truth. We all know God exists, but we suppress that in unrighteousness. Romans 1 is true. And it applies to everyone, but that works itself out in different ways.
There's that presuppositionist I know. I butchered that word. Let's try that again. Presuppositionalist. Presuppositionist. I don't know.
That's just the Bible, man. That's not
it is. That's true. I agree. I agree. So, hey, you think about youth ministry, your job there. What's the best part of that job? And then on the flip side, what's something that's just really hard, just on both sides of the spectrum there?
The practical best part of my job is all the free food I get. Part of
all the chips and pizza and Coke.
Yeah. So part of what I do and what my wife helps me with is I seek to disciple all the young men that we have in our youth ministry, the ones whose parents want that and the students want that. And we can make it work to, whether that's meeting once a week, meeting once every couple of months. So I end up getting a lot of food through that. And my wife does that with the girls. So that works out pretty well. But in reality, like the greatest joy, I think, in the youth ministry is seeing kids like realize the truth. Like I think I've heard a lot of teachers talk about like they live for that light bulb moment, the math teachers when they're, they're explaining calculus and like you can just see the light go off in the back of their head. And it's really cool doing that in youth ministry because that's another thing I think biblically that is a work of God and it's like a supernatural work. So if they're actually realizing the truth, accepting that truth and happy about that truth, that's 100% like a work of God. And you can actually like see that like physically manifest like on their face and you can like see them like coming to acknowledge that truth. So that's cool. The hardest part is watching kids reject the truth is really hard. Because again, that's a thing where I feel a lot of helplessness in that sometimes because I recognize the fact that I can't change anybody's heart. I can't change anybody's mind. Mm-hmm. And I take encouragement when God is doing that work. And I'm just going to word this honestly. Sometimes God chooses not to do that work with with people.
It's true.
And
it's true. Yep.
And that can be discouraging. And I always have to just fall back on the recognition that, again, God is God and I'm not. So God is wiser than I am. And recognizing that a lot of times, I think the way the work of the gospel works is that there are people who hear the gospel many, many times in their lives. And it's not until years later that God actually does that work to open their eyes and give them the gift of faith and bring them to himself. So I always have that confidence that God is going to save who he's going to save. And I get to be part of the means that he uses to do that if I'm faithfully proclaiming the gospel.
Right. Yep. No, I agree. Give us a little bio, just kind of how Christ found you.
Yeah, I grew up in the church. I grew up going to church every week, going to Sunday school, being part of an Awana program, all that stuff. To the best of my knowledge, I was justified in 11th grade.
We need to, all of the theological like red flags are going off in our heads. We get it.
In 11th grade, I distinctly remember walking down a hallway of my high school and realizing that I deserved God's wrath. And I'd heard the gospel so many times at that point that just immediately I knew what the answer was. I knew that Jesus was the one who had taken my sin upon himself and gives me his right standing before God. And so I think that was kind of the immediate moment of justification for me, I guess.
Cool. What's something that when you think about your church there at Avondale, what's something you're like, you know what, we're doing this right. I really, really value how our church does fill in the blank.
So I got to mention at least two or three. One is that the women's ministry at our church is doing a 2-year Bible reading plan. And not everyone's doing it. Not everyone's doing it perfectly, but the women of our church are in God's word and submitting themselves to God's word. And it seems like there's a lot of learning and a lot of growth and a lot of just really great things coming from that. In general, our church has been doing a big push to promote discipleship. So just kind of the biblical model in general of the older people discipling the younger people in the church, the older women discipling the younger women, older men discipling the younger men. So that's something that kind of church-wide is getting some traction there. So I'm really excited about that because we do live in a culture that's people are really independent, I think. And one of the things that can fall to the wayside is seeing the need for relationship and seeking out the benefits of that God ordains for us to have in the church body. So we're doing all those things.
I found this quote online. I think I shared it on Facebook too. It says that friendship is one of the sweetest joys of life. Many might have failed beneath the bitterness of their trial had they not found a friend. And that's specifically in the church. And the importance of, like you were saying, just the gospel-centered community, because that's where we find the accountability. That's where we find encouragement. That's where we find joy. That's where we find people that come around us and disciple us, because we all need it, right? And I agree, it really does kind of buck against the kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality that perhaps some Christians have in America that I know that I have. That's like, no, you're actually not enough. You don't have what it takes. Ultimately, yes, it is Christ, but he uses the community of the church, right? And that's super, super important. Charles Spurgeon said that quote, by the way. I just thought I'd mention.
Yeah. I actually knew that. I was going to attribute it to Rob Bell or something and have you laugh like you did just now, like you're doing right now.
So. Rob Bell wishes he could. Never mind. Okay.
That's actually a pretty soft quote for Spurgeon. So it actually almost anyone could have said that.
Man, he was the Prince of Preachers, man.
It's good.
If I were to ask you, what are the 3 top characteristics that make a good servant in the church? What would you say the top 3 are?
Humility.
All right.
Courage.
Okay.
You only need 2, and those are them. That's all you need.
Humility and courage. Okay. We'll go with it. We'll go with it.
That's all I
Breaking
can
the
think of. I
rules.
don't know.
That's right. So when you think about service, both in the church and, working a 9 to 5, how do you believe our Christianity, the Christian worldview, if you will, how does that filter in and through our service? Meaning, how should that infect and affect our view and our actions when we serve?
Yeah, I guess my mind goes to, I've been reading Philippians 2 a lot lately, but the example that Christ set, um, who even though he was God, he didn't consider that something to be grasped while he was here on earth, that he chose to lower himself and take the form of a servant to his creation, which is a mind-boggling thing. But we're made to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And so that service that we do for God is supposed to come from a heart that is thankful to God for who he is and what he's done for us. Um, and we're supposed to recognize that that's a gift to us to be able to do that, and to find our fulfillment in that, and even to be able to glorify God in doing that.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, and that's so countercultural too, is that it's service is usually we usually see service as something that is just kind of just something, just a hoop to jump through, something that we're just going to get done, get it over with, and then move on to what we want to do. But what you're saying is actually having this kind of this mentality that service is the blessing given to us by God, and viewing that as a good and joyful thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's something I've probably spent 30 minutes in the last 30 years with like that right mentality. Probably, like if you totaled up the total amount of time I had that correct mentality about that would probably be like the total amount, because it's not an easy thing, because we always want to, we always have the tendency to go back to thinking like we did before we were saved, that we are God, that the world is about us, and that we define what's good, we define what we should want. And yeah, as soon as service becomes like this mandatory, obligatory, just you have to do it thing, or I think we're missing the whole point, that God is working in us, not to control us and force us to perform these actions, but he's working in our hearts to change what we desire and what we want,
Yeah.
and even the
Right.
things that we find our joy in. And so when that becomes obedience to God, when that becomes our joy, that's it. And I don't think anybody arrives there at any point while we're
No,
here
of
right
course
now.
not.
But like in those moments where you can actually have that, that's some of the most joyful. That's the most like solid foundation for joy there is, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It really does. It's a different attitude of service. It's how do we view why we're doing what we're doing, right? It's a different mentality. And when you think about just kind of the correct attitude of service, right? The attitude that a Christian should be having when they enter in to service in the church. How would you encourage the Christian that comes to you and says, Luke, I want to serve. That's something that I believe is important, but I don't see the value in it. I don't see where it pays off. I don't see where the importance lies in it. How would you go about, counseling or encouraging that person and kind of reorienting their thinking a little bit as to seeing, no, service is important.
I would want to just ask them questions that would probably get them to the point where they realize that, and ask them, well, what do you think? What do you think is the purpose that God put you here for? Why do you think that you are? Why do you think you're alive? Why do you think you're here? I think almost every sin, every misconception that we have is us forgetting or not recognizing who God is and who we are, and
Wow.
that
Yeah, it's
that's
true.
kind of I don't know who it was. I should know this. Some classical Christian philosopher. Something was it was knowledge of God and knowledge of self are the two things to pursue. And when we have the right knowledge of God and have the right knowledge of ourselves, everything kind of, I think, flows from that, and we recognize who and what we are, and we recognize our purpose, and we recognize where we should be finding our joy.
I think I would take that even one step further and say that it's impossible to have a correct view of self without a correct view of God first.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Right.
I'm 99.9% sure I agree with that.
That's the Luke I know right there.
No, it sounds good.
I'm gonna jump on this ship, but not quite.
No.
It'd be so close. Let's see. So what would you say you think the modern day church's view of service is? Whether you think they have a misconception of what service is for in the church, why, some of the reasons why they might say you should or shouldn't do this. What do you think the modern day churches, not specifically yours, because it sounds like yours has a pretty good, a good view on it. But what would you say just kind of the church culture as a whole in 2019 America? What is the culture of service, do you think, in our society today?
I I think it's there. I think one of the you could call it heresy, I guess, that's really just invading our American culture right now and invading the churches is, I think, a form of legalism. And it's related to a lot of this like social justice stuff and all of these
Mhm.
things where you form your identity about being right and being a good person. And
Hmm.
I think that that invades a lot of my thoughts and my mentality. And I think it's pretty common and widespread in our culture. And I think that probably affects our view of service that we think, okay, I want to be in right with God. I want to be doing the right thing. I want to be a good person. So I should do this. And this will make me right. And in a weird way, I think that's like a works-based righteousness that any true Christian would be like, oh no, of course. Like we don't believe that we're justified by our works. We're justified by grace. But then when we step back and see how we're actually thinking about our service in the local church, I think for me at least, a lot of times I find myself falling back on, all right, I want God to be happy with me, so I'm going to do this. This will make God happy with me. This will make me right with God. And that's just
Right.
ridiculous. So it's weird, yeah. But I think maybe that's part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that I see definitely how that would infect service, is because if your mentality as a Christian is that your actions, even without even perhaps without consciously realizing this, but if you believe that your actions and your service in the church somehow affect uh your standing before God, or God's favor with you, right? That if you if you sow the seed, or if you do this, do that, he's going to bless you 100-fold and tenfold, right? Um,
Yeah.
that is one that puts so much pressure on me as a Christian. And I don't know if they realize that if you truly believe that your service is done because you want it to somehow affect your standing before God, I don't think that that's a I don't think that's a train track that you should be happy with following too far.
Yeah, that's a burden we can't bear, and we're unable to. That's why we needed Jesus to bear the burden of that for us. We're incapable
Right.
of it.
Yep. So when you think, Luke, about Christians that inspire you to follow Christ, follow him harder, follow him faster, and more fervently than you do now, one, who are those Christians for you? Whether they're around you right now, Christians that you've read or listened to, whatever the case, who are those Christians for you, and what are the traits that they possess that inspire you to want to follow Christ more?
Yeah, I would say the number one is actually probably my wife. I think she puts me to shame
Mm.
when I we shouldn't compare ourselves to other people, but
Oh,
like when I
but
compare
please
myself to
do.
her, when I compare myself to her, and I look at her joyful and happy submission to God and in what He calls her to do, that that blows my mind. So definitely my wife is like number one, and I see her every day, see her all the time, and so I get to see what she's really like when she's not, when she doesn't have her A game face on and she's ready to go. I see all of that, and there is a bedrock uh, in her heart and in her soul that God has put there, and it is a joyful and happy submission to God, and that blows my mind. And then, yeah, I mean, I could name 100 people in my church probably that I look up to just in different ways. But yeah, especially the volunteers that we have in our youth ministry at our church.
Yeah.
Those are people who are making small sacrifices all the time, whether it's having a conversation with the kid is sick and they're standing way too close to you, and you're like, well, I'm going to be sick for the next week, but I'm going to care enough about this kid to have a conversation with
them. For Jesus.
I'm going to have a conversation with them about a video game I've never heard of in my life, because it's worth it to invest in this student.
Right. I'm pretty sure that's persecution though. Like, we could write a whole Pure Fix film off that.
Yes. Youth leaders not dead for.
Youth leaders almost dead, but sick. Four. There's already been 3. Okay.
Has the third God's Not Dead movie come out yet?
Yeah, it's true.
Did you get a theatrical release?
God's not dead again, and
You're
again.
Not dead again?
That's right. Oh man. So Luke, obviously being in youth ministry there, I know you've got a lot of them. Both of us do, but give me one of the funniest or most unforgettable experiences, specifically in church, that you have ever had.
Oh, funniest unforgettable experiences in church. I was talking to my wife about this question, and she was like, yeah, you can share that one. And I was like, so yeah, there was a time where I was on a retreat, and one of the students that was in our youth ministry had purchased a weapon, and my name was on it. And by all apparent accounts, the plan was to murder me in my sleep. And we had a good laugh.
Hold on. Back up. Hold on. We need to suss this out a little bit.
No, we can't. I can't suss it out any more than that. But my life was being threatened. And
your life was being threatened. Okay, so from the information that you just gave me, you were on a youth retreat. You had a kid buy a knife with your name on it.
A weapon.
First off, where did he find the knife with your name on it? What is this, like a?
No, you can't. That's the end of the story. That's the end of the story. The end of the story is I had a safe night's rest. It all ended up being a joke.
You're alive.
We all ended up. We assumed that it was a joke. And I didn't die, so I'm still here.
That's interesting.
That'd be a good thing to cut out of this recording. So go ahead and feel free to do that. You're not going to. You're going to put all of this on there. And I'm still talking. So
sometimes you just stay quiet and let it be awkward, and they will just keep talking.
Right.
And that's when you get the gold.
Oh, I never thought of that. I'm gonna apply that to my discipleship of students. Just sit there and wait for the gold to pour out.
Just literally sit down in front of one of your kids. Just stare at them.
Yep.
Don't say anything.
Sipping my Mountain Dew. Just stare. I'll let you know how that goes.
Yeah, please do. And it's like, just no phones, nothing. Just stare at them.
All right. Next meme.
All right. Hey, we're into the Monday hot takes now. So that
means we got 10 minutes, so let's do it.
Yep, we're good. That means that we're going to ask you a bunch of random questions. You give me the first thing that pops into your head. You ready for this?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Favorite movie?
The Zack Snyder cut of Justice League. No.
that exists somewhere.
Favorite movie? I'm gonna go with Starman.
Starman.
Starring Jeff Bridges.
All right. Let's see. I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm gonna make sure. Favorite band or musical artist?
Oh, that's changing every day. I'm gonna go with Captain Jazz.
Captain Jazz.
CAP''N space JAZZ. Sorry. Yeah, Captain Jazz. Like Captain Crunch, but Captain.
That's how you spell jazz. Yeah, JAZZ.
Yeah. Yeah, greatest band of all time.
I thought it was MXPX.
Oh, they were my favorite band in high school. Yeah, they're the band I've seen more than any other band. I love those guys.
You actually drug me to an MXPX / Five Iron Frenzy concert.
That was a great show. Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't understand what they were saying. Something was unmixed. Favorite day of the week?
Friday.
Your day off?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's right. What's the worst book you've ever read?
The worst book I've ever read.
The Shack.
I haven't read The Shack.
That's my go-to.
I read a page. I opened up
Zim Zoom of Love.
I had a copy of The Shack. I opened it up once just to read part of it, and I opened to the page where God is talking to another character, and he's like the character's like, in the Bible it says you turned your back on your son, and God's like, no, I would never do that. It was just from his perspective that I turned my back on my son. I was like, all right, I think I got the gist of this book. I think we're good.
That's all I needed.
Worst book I've ever read. I haven't read The Zim Zoom of Love yet. I'm glad you got me that book, but I haven't read it.
Yeah. Wait, I got you that book?
You bought me that book.
I bought you a Rob Bell book?
Yeah, I think it was for like a birthday gift.
This had to have been ironically.
You paid full price for it. I remember trying to convince you that you had sinned by buying that book because you had paid for it full price from a
pretty
store,
sure it was a joke.
The publisher,
joke. It was a joke.
Oh, I know it was a joke, but I still think I could make you feel guilty for it.
Yeah. Well, you were good at that, but that's okay. Oh my gosh. What is something about current Christian culture that is annoying to you?
All these people thinking they can start a podcast and like, it's like enough with the podcasts already.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. Yeah, we could just be done here. Like this is the podcast that like shattered the dream. I just had you on. That's all
I gotta give you some real answers. So real answer for that thing that annoys me is within, and I have to say Christianity like in air quotes, people placing their subjective experience over God's written word.
There you go. Boom.
Yeah.
So Bethel.
Dude, I watched an Apologia documentary about Bethel, and at first I was like, maybe all this Bethel stuff is overhyped. Is that
cultish?
Stuff.
Right?
Yeah, it was cultish.
Yeah.
And I was like,
watch the God. You know what? Hey, fun fact. It'd be really good for your high school too. The documentary American Gospel.
Dude, I've seen the 1 hour cut of that they put for free on YouTube. Yeah, we're gonna try to show that sometime next year. It's really
is a legit documentary. So good. Let's see, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Flight.
Favorite food?
I'll go with sushi.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna do that. All right, least favorite food?
Cooked fish. No, I'm just kidding. Least favorite food. Oh, cheese. I hate cheese.
You do hate cheese. Yep. I remember that. Yep. Let's see, nuts and cookies, yes or no?
That's something that should be clearly communicated. It shouldn't be a surprise to someone, but it's something that's perfectly fine if it's been clearly communicated. There are nuts in these cookies.
There needs to be a disclaimer on every cookie.
Yeah, and there's certain nuts that maybe shouldn't be in cookies. Yeah, macadamia nuts, man, that's the good stuff.
What's your go-to karaoke song?
"Oh Messy Life" by Captain Jazz.
Oh my goodness!
Look it up.
All right, I'm just gonna have to look up this Captain Jazz now.
I showed them to you one time. And you told me, you said to me, you don't like this. That's what you said to me. And I was like, no, I like this. And you're like, no one can like this. And I was like, no, I do. And you're wrong.
Is that the weird spoken word guy that sounds like he's literally in the middle of a cocaine fueled frenzy?
That's Listener. Listener is also incredible music, but Captain Jazz is the best.
This guy sounds like he's in the middle of a methamphetamine fueled frenzy.
No,
very different. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Wars.
Yep, good. Did you see the new trailer this morning?
I did. Dude, we're Palpatine cackling at the end. I was freaking out. My wife was laughing on track. At me. Yeah,
we're back on track. Thank you, JJ.
I hope so. Yeah.
Let's see. What's the best advice you've ever been given?
Look both ways before you cross the street.
Okay.
Saved my life many times.
Probably every day. What am I supposed to like? Yeah, I guess. Sure, I guess.
All right, you bought me enough time. I should be able to think of a real one by now, but
I'm flabbergasting as much as I can here, buddy, but that's okay.
Flabbergasting is not a verb. Flabbergasted is
literally anything can be a verb if you add ing to the end of it.
You said, I'm flabbergasting right now. I'm trying to think of the word that you meant, but I can't think of that word.
I don't know either.
It's like I was trying to think.
Filler busting.
Yeah, it's a filibuster. Filibustering,
Filibuster.
is that a verb? Filibustering?
Flabbergasting.
Flabbergasting right now. Like I'm in the act of being flabbergasted.
Sounds like a bad like medical condition. Like he's flabbergasting.
Patient's flabbergasting. Give me 10 cc's of something. Yeah.
he's flatlining. Okay. we're gonna land this. We're gonna land this ship.
What?
Ship. Ship. I said ship.
That's Dave. If you edit that out, I will be sorely disappointed.
I said ship. There was a P on the end of that. Okay, I need to end this. Luke, I appreciate you being on the podcast. Thank you for being a guest with us today. Yeah, got nothing else. Thanks for being on, man. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Thanks for inviting me.
All right. Well, guys, you can head over to iTunes and leave a raving review and a 5-star rating. If you don't mind, we really appreciate that.
A raving review? Is that where you like dance while you're reviewing?
Yes. Yeah. You have to be literally in the middle of a rave when you review it. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Music, YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you find your podcast. We are there. Head on over to facebook.com/everydaymonday. Thank you all for joining us in the trenches today, and we will catch you on the next ep of Every Day of Monday. Oh, that was awesome.